Well, hello. We are live with another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw with your host, Marc Ruiz Evans. We're going to get into the current headlines, what's happening in the news, what you need to know about why California would be better off independent, and on the any updates on the continuing discussion on national independence. Give me 1 second to fix this real quick. So, of course, whenever I go on, that's when people call for. So for whatever reason, I can't do a show anymore without people calling the second that I get on. Okay, getting into it, the headlines and the news and what's going on, the discussion on the idea of California possibly pursuing itself as a nation, why it would want to do that, and what's going on with the larger national discussion around the topic of national divorce. Let's get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is that you can't trust the federal legal system. So what they're talking about is the Supreme Court is the highest arbiter of all legal decisions in America as framed in the Constitution. So if the Supreme Court says something is legal or illegal, that's it. You can't really do anything about it. Congress could, in theory, make a law to go around the court's rulings, but they really haven't done that in about a century. So what that typically means is that while there is an allowance for Congress to make a law, so if the Supreme Court says you can't eat apples, that would be the way that the law works. Congress, in theory, could make a law saying you can eat apples. But typically that hasn't happened in a very, 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 very long time. Those decisions where Congress basically made a law to ensure the limits that were placed on them by the Supreme Court is historic. You got to go back around a century. So what that means is that de facto wise, when the Supreme Court makes a decision in America, that is the final decision. That is the law, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you can protest, you can write your Congress member, you can attempt to get a progressive president in, and it will literally make no difference at all. So let's cover what's going on right now with the legal system. I'm going to do a share screen just so you can take a look at some of these articles. We'll go from there. So the first one is that this is in the Sacramento Bee, which is the newspaper of our nation's capital. Why the U.S. Supreme Court could face its greatest legitimacy crisis in nearly a century. Erwin Chemerinsky wrote this article. Erwin Chemerinsky is the top constitutional scholar in California, period. He was also the person in February 2017 in GQ magazine who said that a simple majority vote of Congress would be all it would take for California to secede. So the top constitutional scholar in California wrote this article, and previously he had said all it would take for California to legally secede was a simple majority of Congress, because all it took for California to join the Union was a simple majority of Congress. He's also the top constitutional scholar. So when he speaks, it does carry weight. He's talking about how the Supreme Court is now the most conservative it's been in decades, basically since the 1970s. What he's talking about is that we're going to go into the first full term of a dominant Supreme Court. This is the first full term with Barrett on the court, in 2022, which is this year, will therefore be the year we find out what it means to have a truly right-wing Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's going to be hardcore conservative in a way it hasn't been in over 50 years since the 1970s. And even if Joe Biden gets his one pick in, which is a maybe, it won't change the nature of the court from being dominant conservative. He then talks about some court cases that were decided by a majority of the conservatives. The Supreme Court blocked the broader regulation, with all 6 conservative justices ruling against it, but narrowly upheld the requirement for healthcare workers. So what they're talking about is when you have this many Supreme Court justices who are conservative, they can make very extreme rulings that maybe a lot of Americans, and certainly Americans in progressive cities and states, would not agree with, but you have to follow it because that is the final word on the law, and there's nothing you can do about it short of getting Congress to overrule that or create a law, which hasn't happened in many, many, many decades. What he concludes, though, is given that the Supreme Court is so conservative in a way that it hasn't been in half a century, that it might make rulings that are out of line with what the American people, or a majority of them, certainly progressive and certainly the people in California, would want. And this could go to the point that the court loses legitimacy. If so, what will it mean to have a Supreme Court that is much further to the right than the American people? If the rulings go as I predict, I foresee the court facing deteriorating approval ratings and a crisis of legitimacy unlike anything we've seen since the 1930s. So the Supreme Court has gone more far right than it has been in 50 years, while the majority of the country has gone left or progressive. So you're going to have a legal system saying this is what's true, and you're going to have a majority of the population who's saying this is what's true. If the court gets so far out of line of what the public wants, the public may just stop listening to the court. Joe Matthews, the California columnist, wrote an article, I believe, last year, where he said, if the Supreme Court continues to make outrageous rulings, don't be surprised if Californians deny your rulings and stop following what you say. That was Joe Matthews. He said that. Here's Erwin Chemerinsky, the top constitutional scholar in California, now saying that. So you have a top reporter, Joe Matthews, suggesting this. Maybe we don't follow the Supreme Court's rulings. And now you have the top constitutional scholar in California saying the American Supreme Court is going so far right that maybe they don't have a legitimacy in the eyes of Californians anymore. Now, what's interesting is this article is about secession and how secession in America could happen. Could America's deeply flawed institutions lead to civil war? By James Cox. What he's talking about is this book by Stephen Marsh called The Next Civil War. This is the newest book on how a civil war in America could happen by Stephen Marsh. And what's interesting is that Stephen Marsh says kind of what Erwin Chemerinsky is saying. It's the institutions themselves, comma, the Supreme Court, comma, 5 out of 9 judges on the Supreme Court were selected by presidents who did not win a popular vote. They're going to make decisions about abortion soon and have a huge number of Americans will not regard that as a legitimate legal decision. So we have Erwin Chemerinsky saying this court is so far right that people may not view them as legitimate. We have Joe Matthews saying that the Supreme Court may make such egregious decisions that Californians don't follow their rulings. And now we have a scholar on secession saying one of the most likely conditions to cause secession in America is the Supreme Court with its extreme rulings. It's all coming together. I'll see if I can find that Joe Matthews article here in a minute. Now, moving on. Just because you can't trust the federal government on legal system doesn't mean that's the end of the problem. So you also can't trust the federal government for disaster assistance or for agriculture support. Let's go to those articles now. Do a share screen, and I'll show you what we're looking at. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So citing drought, U.S. won't give water to California's farmers. What they're talking about is that the federal government owns some of the pipelines that deliver water to the Central Valley, which produces 90% of the fruits and vegetables for America. And they're not going to give them water because of the drought. So for the 3rd straight year, they're not giving them any water. Here's another article on the same topic. California farmers left out to dry as U.S. government allots no water. The move marks the 4th time in the last decade that farmers in California didn't receive water from the Central Valley Project. What they're talking about, to give a little bit of context, is this. If you zoom out, here's California. This green part represents the Central Valley. That's where 90% of the fruits and vegetables for the American population are grown. If we zoom in here, we can see this. This is this red line here is the federally owned Central Valley Water Project. As you can see, it feeds water to the most productive part of the Central Valley, the Fresno to Kern County region, which is the most productive part of the most productive region for agriculture in all of America. It's also the most productive region for agriculture in the entire planet, is the Central Valley. 4 times in the last decade, 3 times in a row, the federal government has said, we can't provide water to the #1 place that produces fruit and vegetables for our own population. Now, they're framing this as the federal government isn't going to get California water, and that's true. Why do we need to be part of something that can't help us out in a disaster assistance? That we're having a drought, the federal government says, we can't help you, can't do anything for you, you're all on your own. But it's even worse than that, because the federal government's also saying that we can't make sure that we have enough water to feed our own people. When you look at starvation in other countries, it's a failure of the government. So what does it mean when the federal government can't ensure water to the most productive agriculture region in all of America that produces 90% of the food that's not protein that the American people eat? Secondly, just to drive this home, I want you to watch this video from 2014. This is 2014.
Has been here before, but this meeting and this current situation that California is experiencing with the water crisis and with issues of droughts, no doubt this is one of the most impactful, could be one of the most impactful visits the president has had, and really an opportunity to help California out of its current situation.
So he said this is an impactful situation, and it's an opportunity to help California out of their current situation. They said that in 2014. Now it's 2022, or 6 years later, and they're just saying we're going to cut off the water supply. Just to prove the point, here's that article. In 2014, Obama came to the Central Valley, and then in 2016, he followed up with making sure that money got there. So in the article, they're talking about, in that video you just saw, they're talking about, well, maybe Obama can come here and fix this problem for California. In this article, what they do is they actually explain what Obama did. He didn't actually try to provide water infrastructure. He didn't try to provide any new sources of water. What he did was he gave financial assistance to the farmers and businesses who would be impacted by a loss of crops. Senator Barbara Boxer, California's senator, said to Obama, no, bad idea. You're just giving away money to California farmers and businesses, and you're not fixing the problem. This was KPCC, I think that's an NPR affiliate. This goes back to 2016. And our own senator was saying, Barack Obama, president of America, that's not actually how you help California get out of a drought. You're just buying off people who are financially hurt. You're not actually fixing the problem. So here we are, 2022. And they're just cutting off the water. So you had Obama knew about the problem 6 years ago. He did nothing to fix it. Then you had Donald Trump here. Problem still not fixed. Then we're into the first year of the Biden administration. Problem still not fixed. So that's a Democrat, a Republican, and a Democrat, or 3 different administrations, and they couldn't actually fix the water issue or get new water here or figure out some way to provide more water to this region, which literally produces 90% of the fruits and vegetables for the American people. What does that say about a country? You have 3 different administrations and they can't figure out how to get water to their #1 region feeding their own people? Does that sound like a stable government to you? California farmers left out to dry, and a majority of the food comes from California, and they can't even provide for it. So America literally can't provide for its own people to eat, and they're only focusing on that, meaning there's no assistance to California. But what that really means is that you're talking about a superpower that in 3 administrations and 6 years cannot figure out how to make sure that the water issue is adequately taken care of to ensure the food supply to their own people. That's a sign of systemic failure. That isn't a Trump thing. That's not Obama. That's not an Obama thing. I'm sorry, my words are not with me today. That just happens to me sometimes. I don't know why. Bad sign. It's like when Rome fell and it just couldn't make anything work. Does that sound like a nation that can take care of itself? But to pound home the problem even more, the fact is that the drought is a disaster for California. And we pay into this federal system because it's supposed to be a form of insurance policy for California. So you can't leave America because America's gigantic and you'll need them in case there's disasters. What is that based on? I hear a lot of people saying California can't secede because we need a larger government to help us in case we need assistance. That's never happened in 30 years. So there was the recession in 2008 with Obama. Schwarzenegger went to the federal government and said, can we have a bailout because we are the worst hit part in all of America and we'll be starting off the recession. And if you let California fall, it will drag the rest of America into the recession. That's literally what happened. California was hit worst. It went down very hard and it started to pull down the entire U.S. economy with it. Barack Obama knew about this and gave literally no help before the case. So we had a recession. That's a disaster. We pay extra money into the federal system since at least the 1980s. The 1 year we needed additional money up front, couldn't get anything from Obama, even though, Californians loved him. Then you can go to the 2001 recession, I believe under William Clinton. And again, California said, hey, we're going to be super hit bad by this dot-com bubble bursting in 2001. If we go down, we'll help bring the rest of the U.S. economy down with us. Additionally, we pay Federal Reserve money to you. So maybe you can give us back a fraction of what we pay year after year. And Clinton said no. And he too was liked by Californians and also a Democrat. And then there was George W. Bush, who allowed the Enron company to price gouge us to the point that there were blackouts, meaning our entire economy would just be shut down because there was no power, as if we were a country in Africa. And we asked George Bush for help and got absolutely none. Then there was the earthquake, I believe Loma Prieta or the Northridge earthquake. And we asked for disaster assistance and we got 50% of what we needed. Governor Wilson widely complained about the fact that we didn't get the level of assistance that we needed. So if you have a recession and a Democrat's in charge, you'll get no help. If you have a drought and a Democrat or a Republican is in charge, you'll get no help. If you have another recession and a Democrat's in charge, you'll get no help. If you have price gouging and blackouts where you can't even keep the electricity on, a Republican will not give you any help. And if you have an earthquake and you need full financial recovery, you will not get help. This has gone on for decades. So I always challenge people when they say, well, we need the insurance policy of the USA to be connected to California. And I go, based upon what? Name the disaster where we didn't have to do it all our own, or where we went to the federal government and they said, you know what? You always pay more into the system year after year since the 80s for about 40 years. You deserve a bailout. We're going to give you the whole thing covered. Don't worry. We're the insurance policy. Everything's going to be taken care of. That's never happened. The biggest earthquake we had in decades, we got 50% of what we needed. Governor Wilson complained. Then we had our entire electrical grid shut down because of price gouging out of Enron from Texas, which was protected by George W. Bush and his cronies. And we got no assistance on that. And then we had a recession under Clinton, no help. Recession under Obama, no help. And then we had drought under Obama, Trump, and Biden, and we got no help. So blackouts, economic recessions, droughts, earthquakes, we don't get what we need. So what exactly are we paying for if when it's time to cash in, we get nothing or 50%? This drought and the fact that the federal government's going to do nothing to help us out is only the most current example. And when summer comes again and the wildfires start happening again, I'm just going to go ahead and predict it. The federal government's not going to be there and things are going to burn down. And the federal government's going to say, oh, I'm sorry, we couldn't provide the amount of assistance that you needed. Things are going on. It's been that way since W. Bush. We've never gotten the amount of assistance we needed over decades in multiple administrations. So what natural disaster or disaster happens to Californians and we get bailed out by the federal government? Where is that? When did that happen? Because it hasn't happened in decades. If you think that's incorrect, please email me or debate me live on video. But it's not there. Now, here's the other thing. We always hear about how California taxes are the worst in America, the worst, super horrible. Actually, that's a lie. I'll show you right now. So this is a new report out. I'm sure some people are going to say that can't be true. Here you go. KTLA, Los Angeles-based station. Study reveals the most and least tax-friendly states and how California compares. Tax friendliness grade. Heavy blue is nice. The blue slightly less than that is a B. And then you have a C, which is kind of a mid-range blue, and then D and E. So these are the top best states for low taxes: Florida, Tennessee, Wyoming, Nevada. And then here's California. It's a B. And then here's these states: Oregon, Utah, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont, and Maine, who are worse than California. Just to prove the point, here are the taxes. Here are the states with the lowest tax burden, top 10. Yes, California didn't make it. Here are the states with the highest tax burden. Do you see California there? No, it's not. So California is not one of the top 10 worst tax states. That's when you look at the average. Money Geek looked at the hypothetical average family, a married couple with one child earning a median national income of $82,852 and owning a $349,400 home, and they broke down the taxes. Now, here's the study that information came from. This is Money Geek. This is the actual study here. Key findings. There's the same map. See how your annual tax bill compares with other states. And here is California. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. California is the 14th best state for taxes. See, here's all the A grades. They stop around Tennessee, and then it moves into the B. And we're back basically as good at taxes as Washington and Arizona and Colorado. Colorado and Arizona love talking about how they know how to manage money better than anyone. And yet we're at the same tax burden as them. Here's all the B's. And you have to scroll all the way down to get to the end of the list. So what that means is 36 states have taxes worse than California. We always hear about California has the worst taxes in all of America. This is actually saying California has the 37th worst taxes in all of America, and 36 states, or 2/3 of every state in the union, has a worse tax regime than California. Something you're probably not going to hear very much of. Again, Money Geek. And here is the original article by KTLA. Came out 1 week ago. Now, finally, one of the things I want to talk about is America's turning more legally discriminatory against California values. And we had talked about earlier in this show how the Supreme Court's turning more conservative. Well, it's not just them. So there used to be this march of progress towards a more progressive America, and that was shattered by Donald Trump. A lot of norms towards acceptance of LGBTQIA people, immigrants, interracial marriages, acceptance of undocumented, acceptance of Latinos, acceptance of African Americans, acceptance of brown-skinned people. Kind of took a backstage and was blown apart by Donald Trump. Texas now is building on that. And Texas passed a law to discriminate against transgender people. The problem is that Texas also passed, or Georgia passed, an abortion law that was upheld by the Supreme Court. So now we're getting to an America where, for the first time in decades, states like Florida, Georgia, and Texas are trying to push back on Roe v. Wade, or the ability to get an abortion, in a manner they haven't done in decades. And while they're doing that, you have a Supreme Court that backs them up. So the march of progress going one way has ended underneath Trump. In its place, you have multiple conservative states trying to push back on landmark decisions that have kept progressive America in place, like Roe v. Wade. And you have a Supreme Court that's so conservative, it's backing them up. Super conservative, Supreme Court, like we haven't seen since the 1970s, that's largely out of line with the opinion of a majority of Americans, certainly progressive areas, and a backsliding on values towards progressiveness by multiple American states creates the perfect storm, where certain states can slide backwards and take away rights, and they'll be enshrined and backed up by the Supreme Court, which means California can do literally nothing about it. Let's show you the article so you can take a look. California officials denounce Texas directive against trans children and parents by Madison Hernison, the Center Square for Washington Examiner, February 24th. California officials on Wednesday decried a new directive announced by Texas Governor Greg Abbott that calls for prompt and thorough investigation into reported instances of gender transitioning procedures. Now, the rest of this article talks about how upset Californians were about this and how backwards and despicable they think that it is. But they also talk about how Texas is trying to undo gun regulations, Georgia's trying to undo abortion regulations, and you might have a Supreme Court that backs them up on those things. That's very scary. So America is further moving away from California values. States are trying to push in the opposite direction of California values, and now it appears the legal regime is so out of line with California values, it will back them up. What that means is that California is going to exist in a union that doesn't have the rights that we care for in California and doesn't protect those rights, all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. We will be completely isolated and alone, and many of our decisions will actually be against the legal regime of the entire federal system. That's going to be an isolated place for us to be able to fight those battles. When Donald Trump was here, California loved suing him left and right. The Supreme Court only became more conservative since that time. California's legal battles against Trump won, but mostly only about 50%, and largely it was because Trump wasn't that smart, and when he tried to do things, it wasn't exactly purely legal what he would do. That being said, that Supreme Court backed up Trump's claims on redirecting funding to the border wall, keeping kids in cages, and blocking Muslims from coming in, and being able to refuse refugee status. So absolutely anti-California values. California lost on all those lawsuits against key values. You're not going to hear that a lot. What you're going to hear is Californians say, we sued Trump so many times and we won a majority of the time. True. And on things like rounding up Mexicans and blocking immigrants and being racist against Muslims, you absolutely lost. So you won 30 decisions, but on key things that are quintessential and essential to California identity, you completely lost. And the Supreme Court's going to become even more conservative, and states are going to become even more challenging of the progressive march that California enjoys. So it's going to get worse. That's why we're showing you all this. Now, here's the last thing. There's still continued talk about national divorce. We saw Ron Perlman from the left back this up. We saw Sarah Silverman from the left also back this up. But we're still continuing to see dialogue from the right. The media is laughing at conservatives calling for secession. And I like to remember the Gandhi quote. First, they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight, and then you win. So they're at the laugh stage where they're trying to laugh at them. If that doesn't work, the next stage is for the system to actually start fighting conservatives against their push for secession. When that happens, conservatives are the people who like to fight. They like to feel like their freedom is being infringed upon, and they like metaphorical battles against the federal government and the tentacles of overreach from the federal system. So the federal government is right before the stage where they start fighting against these conservatives pushing for secession. And when that happens, they're going to make a big mistake because conservatives are the group that really like to fight. And they want to feel, they are dying to have a narrative about how they're downtrodden and the system's against them. And the federal government will screw up and give them that narrative. And then they'll win. First they ignore, then they laugh, which is the two articles I'll show you. And if they don't stop the enthusiasm of the right for secession by laughing at them, the next stage will be to fight them. And that will automatically mean a win because conservatives like to fight. And they like to say, see, the federal government's against us. So let's take a look at where the media is right now. They're laughing at conservatives who are talking about the topic of national divorce. I'll show you those articles right now. So the first one is Dennis Prager imagines conservative paradise without liberal cities and functioning economy by Wonkette on March 1st. They had a conservative convention in Florida recently, and Dennis Prager said this. Sorry.
For all intents and purposes, there are two Americas. For all intents and purposes, there are two Americas. I think Americans are more divided now than they were during the Civil War. During the Civil War, they were divided on the spectacularly important issue of slavery. But otherwise, they were not divided. And now, that's a big deal, obviously. But still, right now, the division is on every issue. We agree essentially on nothing important. And look, there's a fantasy in me that all the big cities of the country secede. It's not geographically possible because you couldn't have such a non-contiguous country. But if New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and San Francisco and Seattle and Philadelphia, if they all made their own country and left the rest of us, even with all the finance that they would take, all the money, all the banks, it would be paradisical for the rest of us. But it can't happen because of the geographical issue. On nothing important. Happen is, I think, what you just painted. The scenario you painted was of people coalescing in the states they agree with.
So that's Dennis Prager, a well-known conservative, saying that. And here's the interesting part. Wonkette is liberal, Prager's conservative, and they described his fantasy, presumably to the theme of Dixie. So they're saying, you know, it's a Civil War. We're going to win this time. Quixotic after Don Quixote type stance. So they're insulting his vision of secession and conservatives being able to have their own area. Here's specifically what he said. If the liberal cities left, if they all made their own country and left the rest of us, even with all the finance, they would take all the money, all the banks, it would be paradise for the rest of us. Now, one thing I will disagree with Prager on is the geographic issue. So California is majority progressive. Conservatives only control the mountains. I've covered this before many times, how a vote for Cal-Exit would go. Conservatives routinely think that California still votes the way that it did 2 decades ago, and that's not true. So Prager saying Los Angeles and San Francisco could leave. Okay, but what about Stockton? What about Santa Cruz? What about Merced? What about Sacramento? Sacramento, Stockton, and Merced are near the Bay Area, but they are far inland, and they all vote progressive over the last 3 elections. So it wouldn't just be San Francisco. It'd be that entire Northern California region all the way out to Sacramento, down to Stockton, and all the way down to UC Merced that would also go with them. He completely forgot that. When he talks about Los Angeles, he forgets that Orange County is now majority liberal. So's San Diego, and so's the Inland Empire. So, again, these conservatives look at California and they think only the coast is liberal. They forget the last couple of elections where they've gone majority progressive. I think Kern County is the only holdout in the entire inland area, and the rest is in the far north mountain region and the mountains against the west. So he's wrong about how California couldn't secede and it would just be cities in a balkanized state. That's not our way anymore, and has been for about 10, 15 years. But the point is that here's a conservative talking about secession. It's called a fantasy by a liberal newspaper, the Wonkette. Here's another example. Here's another liberal place, shorelinemedia.net. They're talking about how Ted Cruz, another conservative, talked about how Texas may want to secede. and take the military bases and NASA with them. And they would go, here's Ted's grandiose vision that ignores the facts. So it's the same insult from a liberal newspaper against the conservative that we saw with Dennis Prager. So that's two different liberal newspapers looking at two different conservatives, Prager and Cruz, and saying these guys are fanciful and kind of stupid for even picturing this, and they really didn't think it out. Again, not really saying much more than the fact that the media can no longer ignore this issue. They're trying to laugh at it. And right before laughter comes, they fight it. And when they fight it, that will be the mistake that will bring down the downfall of the USA, because conservatives are looking for a fight. Let's take some comments now. If they're relevant, I'll post them. If they're not, I won't. Zimmerman Productions Incorporated. Hello. How you doing? That's it for comments. Just want to keep you updated about what's going on with national divorce and the topic of why California should secede, making sure that you're kept up to date on the relevant headlines, what they mean, and relevant analysis provided by me, your host, Marc Ruiz Evans. Thank you, and I'll see you very soon.